All right, on Deep Thoughts today, we're going to go for screenwriting part 2 with a major focus on rewriting. So you're like, if you follow this show, you're kind of like, what the hell? Screenwriting? I recommend you go, if you're interested in screenwriting, go back to my, I think it's like episode 4 or something like that. I could be wrong, but between 4 and 8, somewhere in there, is my initial show on how to screenwrite. And today I'm going to give you some gems, some major gems about screenwriting, because out of the, 20 books that I own on the subject and all the classes I've ever attended by the greatest screenwriting teacher on planet Earth, Robert McKee, and yes, I've vetted some other ones too, other instructors that try to do a almost a get-rich-fast scheme of writing scripts. Rewriting is something that's barely ever discussed. And because screenwriting is so difficult and so coveted and so rare when you succeed in it, that writers don't tend to help each other out when it comes to rewriting, not without money. And I have been involved at least for the last 8 years in professional film projects. So I pined for 20 years prior to that, roughly, to learn how to do it. And then eventually, through meeting various people, ended up working on these projects and helping films go all the way through. And even in my own endeavors, again, you'll get some people that are, once they reach the very tippy top and they make enough money and have enough successes, they'll end up helping you out. But there's all kinds of elements that are never discussed, or at least they're discussed by folks that have, they're discussed by folks that haven't been credited for making films, and then you'll have a person that gets lucky and gets one out the door, and then they sort of say, well, look at me, I'm a total authority on this. I would say we're all working together to try to make this thing happen for each one of us. And I just tell you that, again, because there are so few great screenwriters, that once someone cracks the nut of how to do it, they tend to covet and withhold information. And it could be your best friend, just, not wanting to give up the juice once they figure it out. Because a lot of these things are, they're simple in concept. And I think the funny thing is that coveting any of the how-to information on screenwriting is sort of ridiculous, because it still comes down to the individual writer. And because people are very different, they're never going to really step on each other's toes. You're never going to write a script every single time that you give to your buddy, and your buddy's like, oh my God, I wish I wrote this. It just doesn't happen. I've got friends of mine who write films probably one every 10 months to a year, and they've always got ones, on the side boiling up. And, they'll give it to me, and it's a masterpiece, but it's something I would never write. I would never want to go back in time and have written it, so it's just a certain preference. It's like writing music. You write a song that half your friends hate and half your friends love. And so films are just like that. So anyway, this episode's going to be about just a ton of information. I don't care how senior you are in the project in the process of writing screenplays. I'm bound to touch on some information that is valuable to you. But if you're just someone who hasn't sold something and you're looking for that extra touch, or you're brand new to the art and you've run into some roadblocks, or you finished your first script and you've handed it out to folks and they sort of just look at you like, not for me, and you've been disappointed that maybe you don't have the skill set, definitely get to the end of this. I don't care if what I'm talking about at any one split second doesn't interest you. Try to get to the next section, because what I might end up revealing for you is the one thing that you're not doing that will take your script and jack it up to that master level writing. Even if you don't know exactly how to solve your problem, half of that issue is just knowing what to do. Okay. So I suck back some Fiji water here. Feeling a little parched. It is one of the last warm days in Southern California for a while. I woke up, it was 55 degrees, and now it's like, 78. I have a lot of subjects I want to get into, and just so you know, I'm going to take 90% of this episode. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to describe all this. So I don't know if we're looking at an hour episode or more. It could be 55 minutes. I don't know. But I do want to talk about some things surrounding the industry and sort of some perspectives you need to have when entering the industry, because this is some of the secret sauce as well, that I made the mistakes of being a rookie, getting into the art of it. And so I just want to make sure you understand the way Hollywood works, right? There's two sides to it. There's the cultural side to it, which people completely miss almost every single day when they get into screenwriting. And then there's the business sense of it. And then we'll get into the script writing part of it. So all of this dovetails together. So all of this is critical for you to understand. Social. The world has generations. Right now, at any point in time when you're writing a script, you need to think of generational jumps in tens, okay? 0 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, just every decade up. And you need to understand that what you're writing has to fit as many of those decades as possible. Writing film, regardless if you like it or not, is a certain amount of art that is your special journey, your ability to tell a story that people are actually interested in. Remember, you have premise and you have story, right? One is just mechanical circumstances, and the other one's actually emotional turns. And then the other part is locking it into the demographics of the business side of things. And you'll see people fail all the time, not understanding that this is part of a business. And I'm just going to tell you right now, if you're holding on to this idealistic thing that you have art and that it's just art, and no one should tell you what to do in the industry, you're in the wrong industry. There's a movie about a gentleman, and his name is so hard to say I can't say it, but he attempted to make the movie Dune back in the 70s. And he's a Spanish director. I think he's from Mexico, actually. But he, brilliant guy. He's made some crazy independent movies back in the 70s, and his goal was to make a movie, I think almost his goal with every movie was to make a movie that looked like the experience of LSD, having not taken the drug. And he said, this is going to appeal to people who've taken LSD, and it's going to appeal to people who haven't taken it so they can open their minds a little bit. And he designed this fabulous thing with this amazing crew of Mobius, Giger, just all these incredible artists working together to make this script. And he couldn't get it sold. And he ended up watching it get made in the 80s, and it broke his heart. But his one major fallacy was that he wanted to make it his way and hold on to the art side of things. And of course, most of us step back and go, well, dude, that's the way you're supposed to make it. And it's like, well, that's not the way Hollywood works. So what is your choice? Never ever make the film that you want to make, or make a film that you want to make. And the people that have succeeded in a major way have understood this duality between art and business. And if you really want to pat yourself on the back for being a clever artist, then you'll have no problem engaging both sides of the fence. You must understand what motivates at any point in time, because it's constantly shifting, right? And all these groups, the kids that are in the 1 to 10 have a certain mentality right now. They're watching certain things on television. They're doing certain things in their personal life. Either they're addicted to telephones or they're not addicted to telephones. One demographic might be going retro and they don't want to have anything technology on their hands. They're dressing in 70s clothing. Another group is trying to hang on to the 90s. Another group's trying to hang on to the 80s. You need to pay attention to where society is to figure out who's going to absorb your film the best, who's going to instantaneously get what you're writing, and who's going to need to struggle. And of course, if you have a struggle point, then you have something you need to address in your script. Now, most of you would go, well, I don't want to sell out that bad, but I'll tell you what, if you go look at the favorite movies that you've ever made in the world, or ever watched in the world, you'll find that movies appealed to you as a child, and they also appealed to your parents. And one of the things I always think about is the movie Poltergeist by Steven Spielberg that came out in the early 80s. It was like 81 or 82, somewhere in there. Poltergeist appealed to me as like an 11, 12-year-old, and it also appealed to my dad so much so that he picked me up after school, grabbed my best friend, and he says, I'm taking you to the movie theater. I'm going to dump you in the theater. I'm going to go do something else. You guys watch the movie. It's fabulous. Boom. My father was in his mid to late 30s, and I was in my, early pre-teens. But it motivated him, and it motivated me and my best friend. And it's become a legendary film within the kind of kitschy, scary movie. It's kind of a classic, right? That's Steven Spielberg understanding how to write a film to appeal to multiple demographics. And that is what you have to do. Another thing, just to get some of the clerical stuff out of the way. When you write a film, you typically get, if you start really loving what you're doing, you typically get very scared that someone's going to steal it from you. And unfortunately, Hollywood has rigged the situation such that you never can really protect what you do. You can't. The amount of movies that are legendary that have been ripped off from friends of mine who have proof that they wrote the film first and then it was made by someone else after doing a pitch. Like they heard the pitch and they go, oh, that's a great idea. Now, the studios didn't steal the scripts necessarily and steal the words off the page, but they steal the beautiful concept and the architecture of the characters, of the storyline, of the premise, of everything. I recently just got off a 3-year film project where we pitched it around because I was working with some legendary people that had all the connections in the world. The script was actually pitched to over 100 studios. The movie was later ripped off and became Johnny Depp's Transcendence film. And they did not, again, steal our words, but unbelievable, never-before-seen on silver screen moments from Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 are in his film. Technically speaking, our group, if we wanted to waste a bunch of money and time, could go after that studio and sue their pants off for that film. Problem. We would become the most unpopular folks in Hollywood, and any script we bring in after that, they're going to be like, no, we don't even want to hear your script idea, because if we have anything cooking that's like your script, we know you're sue happy. And so it doesn't happen. So that stuff happens all the time. So if you register your script with the Writers Guild Association, the WGA, they typically won't allow you to encrypt your file, so it's readable by everyone. So as soon as you register it, it becomes it's sort of like an open patent that everybody can look at, and they can start harvesting your ideas, harvesting your visual mechanisms, harvest a single scene out of there that's the big turning point for your script. Like our script that got ripped off, there was at least one scene in the film that everyone who read the film, even if they didn't get it, they're like, man, that scene right there is amazing. And luckily that didn't get cannibalized in Transcendence, at least that I've been able to remember. So when you write a script, it's sort of open market. You can put all the copyrights on there you want. The more crap you put on your front page of your script about, this is me, I wrote this, they're going to start going, this kid's a rookie. Just write, copyright you, year you wrote it, the title, any additional credits you need to give away to folks that you based your story on, any additional writing you've had from a friend or something like that. Make sure everyone who's participated is contractually obligated to you in some way, such they don't come back and say, no, I wrote that film and my buddy stole it from me, and then you got a big dispute issue because one kid might find some pro bono attorney to go in for the winning money, right? That's never happened to me, but I'm just passing that on to you, right? Now, when you write a script, you obviously have a vision in your mind. You've labored over this thing for most likely over a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years, right? And you are married to most of your scenes. You're married to your characters. You don't want anything to change. You see the utter balance of your script, and you can't imagine it being changed, right? They're going to change it. They're going to change it for a ton of reasons and a ton of agendas that you don't understand. They know certain low-hanging fruit techniques of grabbing the demographics. So if you're missing those little fruits, they're going to put them in there. And sometimes they put in stupid stuff. The Wachowski brothers in their, Ascending Rising or whatever the hell their last movie was, they put a guy, running around on like a hoverboard was his big tactic. Someone in Hollywood put that in there because they thought, well, kids ride skateboards, right? Well, why don't we make them ride a skateboard in the movie, right? Ended up being one of the dumbest visual effects in the entire film. And it just, every time he came around in this little skateboard, that he would skate around on, everyone in the theater laughed. Because they're like, how utterly stupid is that? We can see that you're trying to reach down into that, but the only kid that's going to fall for that might be 10 or 11 years old. And to just paint the last act of the film in this technique, it's just overbearing and ridiculous. It makes everything comical when you want it to be serious, that kind of thing. So you'll see that kind of stuff happen. So again, if the more you can button up your script and lock in your action to the point where doing something like that might just completely break everything, the more you'll kind of keep your script balanced. But that's a really tough thing to do. Now, if you've never ever sold a script and you've never been involved in a professional process, then you might not know that there are people that read scripts prior to giving it to the studios, and they charge money for it. I think Robert McKee charges a little under $10,000 to read your script, and he'll actually give you a really good session. He reads it, he tears it up. You get to do a phone call with him. I think he even had a couple of phone calls with him, but don't quote me on that. But he gets in and just figures out where you're going with the script. And he won't, I've never done it with him, but I get the sense that he's not there to criticize any of your idea or your story or your premise. He's just there to make sure that what you did write has the right amount of turns and twists that need to occur, right? I just want to set it up that way because that's going to kind of give you some, as my writing mentor would probably say, grown-up talk about how this system works, because you go in and you're completely... you're just gung-ho at the beginning, and it's not, the truth is not going to destroy you. The truth about screenwriting and all the obstacles and the toughness is not going to hurt you at all. I mean, if you hear it just as raw as it's going to be, and raw as it needs to be, and it's just not going to let you down. Just, you'll be fine. So that's why I want to say this kind of stuff. And as it occurs to me, I'll keep mentioning it. Rewriting. I used to think that if one, and especially if you go to class, they'll teach you, well, if you plan out your script properly, and again, it could take you 2 years to plan out your script. And if you want to know sort of how to plan out your script, I'll review it a little bit here, but all the big details are in my first episode. I'll try to link it somewhere around here. I'll put it in the description. You think that if you plan really, really well, that the writing process, that the dialogue and the action that you'll end up putting together, it's just a matter of executing, right? It's just going to be... set up the setting, start talking about what's going on, then hit the dialogue and move the script along. I think that the analogy that's missing from all the books I've ever heard and of all the education that I've ever heard is the actual process of writing a film. Now, you'll know that a film is separated into acts and then to scenes and the sequences and then beats, right? That's sort of how it flows down into it. And it's just basically honing down, various sections of your script. I have made a switch in my writing style where I designed for a 4-act play. So I like the 4-act format because the traditional old school format was 3 acts, and it was 30 minutes for the first, 60 minutes for the second, and 30 minutes for the last part. And I think that one of the writing blocks for me was to think of a 60-minute continuous act. It's just too big for the brain. And it tends to interfere with the flow of your mind as to how to set it up, right? So I'm finding that 4 30-minute slots is the way to roll. Even if you don't end up with 120 pages, which I'm going to warn you against, you'll still have the structure in your brain. You're like, well, I need to set up the second act to have a big plot turn, which is sort of the center of the film, and then Act 3 is going to set up Act 4, which is the big conclusive act where we wrap everything up, your false endings or whatever. So I'm going to suggest right off the bat as you write, even if you're in the middle of a script and all of your notes are 3-act format, you go with Sid Mead's little table on how to split things up with your plot points and midpoints and all that kind of stuff. Re-engineer your mind for a split second into the 4-act play. Just take the second one and cut it in half. And I think you'll find that it's not so daunting to have, the beginning of your act. You essentially have what's called a pinch point in the middle, something interesting that's happening, usually a subplot turn. And then you go back to your main controlling idea and you conclude that at the end of that particular script with an emphasis on, again, first act's utterly chaotic and wonderful, right? It's the most fun act to write, I think, because it's the setup of every reason why you started writing the script in the first place. And the end of Act 1, you're really just trying to make sure that the studio head who's reading your screenplay or his readers or her readers are utterly enticed, page to page to page, right? Now, as you get more skilled in this, you'll understand you could actually hit your plot point. Your setup could be finished in 1 page, could be set up in 2 pages, 10 pages, whatever. Most of my stuff will set up in 25 to 30 pages. I sort of like the old-fashioned slow build-up. I think in today's, short attention span writing styles, if you set up your script too fast, you tend to overwhelm yourself quickly to the point you have to jump too quickly into the actual body of your script, and you tend to run out of steam because you didn't spend enough time kind of setting up the characters and the dynamics of it all. And I'm just going over this because I know that in Hollywood there are groups that are frowning on 3-act play formats. I say play, but it's screenplay, right? So that's just, and I will say that again, a lot of folks die in the second act, and it's even taught in class when you hear the teacher talk. He'll say people die off in the second. They can write their first act, they can write their last act, but the center part tends to destroy their minds because it just takes a lot of responsibility. So I'm just going to tell you that splitting it up is going to help you out quite a bit. So the first time I brought a script to my mentor, it was, my gosh, I think it was like 136 pages, which is, 2 hours and 16 minutes. And he just thumbed through it, just real quick, sitting on his sofa. And he's like, well, I can tell you right now, it's overwritten. And he just immediately taps the last page and starts writing it. And he's like, yeah, you need to, he goes, why don't you, I'll read a little bit of it, but why don't you rewrite this to be about 110 pages? And of course, that's 26 pages out of the script, right? So I went home and did it. And man, did I learn a bunch about how I was overwriting things. But that's so vague that I was frustrated. I was like, dude, you're not really telling me what to do. You're just saying it's overwritten. And that's a critique that's like, if you're so sure that's overwritten, why don't you tell me how you know that so quickly? And he never did. But what I've learned about that particular process was the following. Let's say you have a scene. It's just like a part in your script where people enter a particular setting, something occurs, and then that setting is no longer used as you go to the next scene. The thing I've never heard described is that what you're taught is if you do everything perfect and you're this perfect writer, that you're going to go into that scene, everything's going to be set up on your outline. All of your turns are all pre-planned. Your premise turns, which are essentially the mechanical evolution of your story. For instance, if you take a Transformers film, you might have like a broken down Transformer behind a character. They're having a conversation about what that is. So there's a premise set of turns that need to occur, which is you need to get that robot started because that's going to get the movie started. But that's not emotional. That's just technical. We got to advance the conversation so that we all agree that we need to fix this thing. Go get a big refrigerator and stick it inside and get it started again, or whatever the heck it is you need to do, right? But then you have your story turns, which is why do you care that they would start up this machine? It has to grip your heart and your soul. Everything that's being spoken has to touch the viewer inside their hearts. It's a very, very daunting thing to do properly. And I'm going to give you an analogy that's actually spot on, I think, to this process. But before I do that, I want to say that the way I want you to view writing in general, and especially in scenes, that's where we can all kind of wrap our mind around it. It is not one of these situations where you're taking a sniper shot, right? And you're practicing how to be a sniper before you take this one shot that's really, really important in your life. And you're just going to fire that bullet and it's going to hit the target perfectly and you can walk away. That is not the way writing works. The way writing works is that you have a gigantic sculpture in front of you, probably of clay, not of marble, because marble is sort of an unforgiving medium, right? You chip it off, you're never going to put that marble back on there. But clay, the analogy in your brain is you're going to sculpt something that you want to sculpt, your scene. Then you're going to go back and sculpt it again, and you're going to keep adding and subtracting from the scene things until the thing looks exactly the way you want it to look. So I want you to get this regimen in your mind, this work regimen in your mind, that you're going to constantly visit your scenes over and over and over again, fully sculpting what's in there. Now, the advanced concept, which I think you might see coming a mile away, is that because every scene is locked to other scenes, right? It's almost like a computer function. You put things into a scene, and then you get something out at the end. And what goes in is set up from the previous scene, and what comes out goes into the next scene. And so you may actually find out that certain scenes need to be moved around inside the script. And you may actually, just as a footnote, you may actually write a scene that only works during the day because the sun's out. You might write a scene that only works during the nighttime because someone can't see someone, right? There's some mechanism that's using darkness. And you move it into a day slot or you move it into a night slot and you almost completely screw up the scene. And so you're going to have the guts to rewrite that scene to work in a different time slot. You might have one of the coolest frickin' twists that only work during the day or during the night, and now all of a sudden you know it can't be where it is because it'll fracture the actual value of the scene. Now, you need to understand that sometimes you got to throw away scenes because you have those actual problems. But let me throw you at this analogy that I just realized after 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of watching Twilight Zones. If you've ever been a fan of Rod Serling's Twilight Zones, which start from 58, go to 63-ish, you will talk about Twilight Zones and the fact they have these crazy twists at the end. And, Sixth Sense had one of those kind of twists at the end. And literally speaking, Hollywood calls those film school endings nowadays because it was ingenious when they did it in the 50 show X-1, which is a radio show on the radio, and then when it popped into Twilight Zones as a filmed theatrical television show, they were the last geniuses to really pull this off. And the amount of movies and books that have been stolen from Twilight Zones is phenomenal. Half of Stephen King's catalog would disappear had he not watched Twilight Zones. It's that intensely cannibalized, okay? But the one thing that's interesting is that when we describe Twilight Zones to each other, if you're a fan, you typically describe the twists almost purely as a premise twist, right? It's a mechanical twist in the scene. And, is it funny that those guys were aliens from Earth and da-da-da, or, it was a big hot air balloon, not an alien, all these different twists, right? Well, what I realized in this last year of rewatching them all, I own them all, and I can watch them on Netflix if I don't want to get out my DVD cases, is that the twists always had one super profound ingredient that was essentially the driving force behind the twist. And that was that they twisted the story. They twisted the emotional heart of the characters. You saw people destroyed or empowered. For instance, there's the Twilight Zone where there's a doctor that built a big bunker below his house, and it's his birthday at the beginning of the scene, and everyone's celebrating his birthday and making fun of him that he wasted the last several years of his life, and everyone had to endure all this construction noise building this bunker underneath his house. And then before the party's over, his son walks in and says, "Hey, Dad, something on the radio about an emergency." They turn on the radio, and it's this threat that the Russians are now sending over their missiles and we're going to retaliate, and it's all going to hell. So everyone kind of splits up and goes home and figures out that they don't really have a place to hide, but the doctor does. And so they all come back to his house and beg to be in his shelter, but he built it explicitly for 3 people, he, his wife, and his little boy. So over time, they all turn into animals. They all go feral, and they break down the door and destroy his bunker, utterly destroying their emotional relationship and bond with him, which was well established in the first scene of them loving him and celebrating him and his birthday. So then there comes on the radio that the whole thing was a mistake. It was some renegade hot air balloons. Everything's fine. DEFCON 5, whatever, right? I think that's the one that doesn't have any emergency to it. Now, at that point, everyone's injured their relationship. They all try to apologize to each other. One guy went into a racial slur against somebody else. One person said, "My kid's more important than your kid because my kid's younger than your kid." It destroyed the emotional bonds between everyone. When you talk about this sequence that you're writing, a scene that you're writing, right, which is built out of sequences, your goal is to engage the heart and to twist it and turn it, right? And in rewriting, what will end up happening is the following. You will have written probably a fairly decent script, right? Especially if you can reread it to family members. That's I'm going to get into that because that's a huge mechanism to figure out whether or not you've actually written what needs to be read by the studio heads, right? But you need to make sure that as you sculpted something, right? Let's say you sculpted a mermaid, right? It's going to be a woman top half and a fish bottom half, right? Well, you make choices when you sculpt something, and when you write, it's the exact same metaphor. It's the exact same thing. But when I talk about a sculpture, you can see it in your head a little easier. And if you're a screenwriter, you must live in the visuals, so this has got to work for you, right? But you make a choice on what eyes to put in there, lips to put in there, what hair. Does it super long? Does it hit the shoulders? Does it go down and cover her boobs? Are you going to show her boobs? Are there shells on her boobs? Does she have big boobs, small boobs, medium boobs? Do you let a nipple pop through? and a contour just to get the voice turned on. And when you talk about that waist, well, is she a skinny girl, medium girl, full body girl? The scales, do you pronounce them really heavily, or do you kind of blend them into the skin and towards the waist, and then you really pronounce the scales as they go down where there's more ridges on them, right? What position is she in? Is she in a flirty position? Is she a surprise position? Is she in some sterile exhibition position? Every choice you make in sculpting this mermaid is going to be rethought over and over and over again to the point you're trying to create the most luscious, amazing mermaid that if anyone looks at that sculpture you made, they're engaged. The women aren't threatened. The men are turned on. The little boys are going crazy in their brain, right? Little girls want to be her. But in order to achieve those touch points with each individual demographic, you know that you're going to have to make visual choices, sculpture, three-dimensional choices in your sculpture. You get me. But that is exactly your responsibility with every single scene that you write, every word that comes out of someone's mouth. Okay? Now, when you get into rewriting, there's really a simple first regiment that you have to go through. All right. Every single act is built out of these scenes, these sequences, and it starts out with usually a little bit of a setting. Then your first action to set up the scene, what's going on in this scene that you've just set. You have your character descriptions, which is I'll get back to that in a second. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Then you have the dialogue that flips back and forth, right? Now here's the thing. I made this mistake several times, and one time I made this, I actually wrote a screenplay that I wrote it in a sort of a fairy tale book format on purpose, because I wanted to entice a potential director to see the script as he or she would direct it. They got the metadata out of some of the more flowery descriptions that I made. And it was understood by most of the people who read it, but not understood by some of the people closer to me. Were like, man, you can't say this kind of stuff. This is like a novel kind of stuff. This line shouldn't be here. And they were actually technically correct, but I forgot to tell this person that I wrote it intentionally like that. And I told everyone who was reading it, in Ron Howard's group, that this is exactly what we were doing. You can't write a screenplay like you write a book. And that might be painfully obvious, but everything that you're doing is writing it in a visual tone. It's in a visual mechanism. In a novel, you could say, oh, he was thinking this or she was thinking that. The only thing you can do with those sort of setups is if you want to make a piece of dialogue that, when you read texts, it's really dangerous because a text doesn't come with any voice inflection. So you could have someone playing a game with you, speaking in sort of a sarcastic voice in a text, but you're not getting it because you don't hear them, and so you think they're being really dry and serious with you, and oh my God, I'm so sorry, or why are you so upset with me? And they're like, no, I was joking, and you don't get it, right? Same thing goes for a screenplay, in that you might put a sentence ahead of a piece of dialogue saying, so-and-so shouts back at so-and-so sarcastically, and then there comes the line, and now we know how to read that line because we've had a little bit of description set up for that piece of dialogue, right? But the very first thing you need to do is set your scene. Now, in a screenplay, you have an economy of words, right? You have words that you have to pick very, very carefully. These words need to be very easy to read. And it's not that you're trying to insult the intelligence of a person reading your screenplay. And you certainly, absolutely do not want to show off with your vocabulary in a script. You start using big, 3 to 4 syllable words, probably 4 to 5 syllable words, and they're going to just put down your script. Like, this guy's really just trying to show off with his literary ability, and he doesn't really care if I am getting the script inside me, right? Smaller words, read faster off the page. It's just that simple. Now, if you go to screenwriting school or you read books, they'll talk to you about the fact that, small words are read quicker. So if you want the script to speed up in someone's mind and they can ingest it quicker, use smaller, tinier words in action scenes. If you want to slow things down, you might start leaning into sort of your bigger words. I know it sounds anal, but that is the art of writing screenplays, right? Now, one of the interesting things you can do to check yourself, with settings especially, is when you take your script and when it's finished, I recommend not reading dailies to people when you don't have the finished part of the script, because you might actually have them enticed to want to read and hear the rest of the story, and you don't have it written. You may not even have it decided. And so if you were to say, oh, I'll have that script, I'll have that next scene for you tomorrow, it'll be great. I'll just read you a scene every day. It'll be like this neat little choose your own adventure sort of thing. You're going to skip that next day. It might even take you a week to figure out something if you know what you're doing. And because you can only give a first impression one time, you don't want to lean on the fact that the next day you're going to have, within 24 hours, you're going to have a perfectly written scene to read to someone else. You're going to end up writing crap just to make the schedule to read to somebody else. So don't do it until you're done. But the reason why I want to emphasize reading your script to someone else is that you will feel all of your mistakes when you reenact your script to somebody else. So how does that go? Quite simply, they're sitting on a sofa, they're sitting in bed, and they're listening to you, and you're acting out your own script. What ends up happening when you start doing this initially is that you'll realize you didn't write certain things down. So one thing, you never want to read a script to someone unless you got something you can write notes on to the side. Hopefully you've done this by yourself before doing it to another person. Pretend they're in the room and read it out. If that bothers you, you're in the wrong business, right? But what you'll find out when you first start doing this is that you will sort of in a vacuum to yourself. Well, I just need to set this up, they're in a forest and da-da-da-da-da. And you're just sort of like painting random things. And you'll even debate in your mind, well, do I need to write more? Do I need to add more trees in my description? Is it that important that I do this? That means you're at the beginning of your art. And that's just fine. But I'll tell you what, if you can envision everything that you write being read off a page in a studio by a professional that actually has green light power to say, I dig your script, kid. I'm going to give this to the guy above me. And if it gets through him or her, it goes right to the director or the producer. Or the producer's going to find the director, depending on who you know, right? Now, at that point, the economy of your words should start making a little more sense to you. The goal is very, very simple, but hard, okay? You need to, when you're sculpting, you need to put on the least amount of clay onto that sculpture as it will take to create the most profound impression on the person observing or reading what you've created, right? You are the camera. If you don't say it, it doesn't exist in their mind. Now, it's not purely true because you can infer things in dialogue. I do it all the time, and I want to talk about that as part of the dialogue refinement section to give people backgrounds to characters that you've never really talked about. I mentioned this in a previous episode. But when you're setting up a scene, there'll be gritty things. Like I have a scene that's set up in the desert in the 1800s, right? And certain things going on. Law enforcement's working on this guy. And at that point, I need to understand what's going to be the most profound objects in their eye, in their view rick, in their frustrum, right? That's going to impress on them exactly the sort of level of tension that I want, the certain level of relief I want. If I want this to be a cool, warm place, it's Avatar 2 and I'm setting up the new Na'vi world, I just want you to feel good, then I'm not going to put that bug that flies across the screen with a 2-foot stinger on the back, because that's going to make you go, oh God, I don't want to be here, right? Everything's going to be soft, smooth, supple, beautiful, and that's what your goal is. So when you're writing, you want to pick your words carefully, structure them carefully, realize that if you are as lucky to get your screenplay read by anyone, you have to make sure the first few pages, your first 3 to 5 pages, have got to just lift that image off the page into their brain as quickly as possible. So unfortunately, you can't write a big methodical beginning unless you are giving it to a friend. You've already got an Oscar in the bag, and people are like, whatever this guy writes is great. So at that point, we're willing to lumber through a few slow pages at the beginning. Most of us cannot do that, and I wouldn't recommend you do that anyway. If your story is worth telling, then joining a program already in session is sort of how the first page works, right? And so you're going to have to get it into their brains quickly. The other one is your first paragraph of action within a scene. You've now set the scene. You've essentially called out every object in the scene that needs to be in the viewer's mind, such that when the action occurs, you're not talking about someone pulling a screwdriver out of their butt crack, right? If someone's fixing a car in your first scene, you need to have talked about the tool chest in the background, just briefly, even if it's through a larger, description of, a dense, dirty, automotive shop that's been there for 50 years. Everything imaginable's in there. And the guy pulls out a screwdriver in the first scene. Well, then your brain goes, I know where that screwdriver came from because I know where I am. But if I wrote a desert scene in the 1850s and a guy pulls out a ukulele, people's going to go like, what? Where the hell did that come from, right? So you have to set things up so things match and they marry each other, right? Now you might think, well, that's just normal writing issues. That's not a rewriting issue. And I will promise you that in your rewriting process, you will find that you don't have the inventory to support the action that's going on all the time. And just realize this is normal. The other one is that as writers, okay, we have a universe in our mind. And one of the curses of a writer, especially the more you're familiar with your scene outline, you're going to be starting your scene, and you can be looking over at your outline, right? The bullet items of everything that needs to happen in your scene. You're thinking, I'm covered. I got it all written down over here. All I'm going to do is transpose this up into actual action dialogue setting. What'll end up happening, if you're like me, is that you have it so memorized that you'll write, and you're like, I know what goes next. I don't even need to look over there. I'm going to look over there a couple times just as sort of like a reference, but I know what goes on. And then at the end of the day, you'll realize you skipped a couple bullets because you were so brilliant with yourself. You actually lived it in your brain, but you didn't write it down. So you have to be fairly regimented with it. And you need to go back and check your scene list versus what you wrote. Because obviously if you wrote it down and you did your homework on your scene setup, on your scene outline, everything matters in your script. I like to write mystery. No matter what genre I'm writing, I love twists. I love twists that are well qualified so the viewer's like, hey, I should have figured that out, but I didn't. Or I saw that coming and it happened. I feel good that I'm a good mystery reader. So I think that it just kind of adds a mechanism underneath the script. It's an extra glue to the mind. I think that's just why I like to write it. Plus, I just like puzzles in general, right? So I have a lot of burden on my hand to do what's called cluing. And anytime you write a mystery, you have a whole bucket of clues that attach to a particular turn in the script, some twisty thing. It's usually premise twists, which then immediately affects the heart of my characters, right? Your action is huge. Your action, if you're a beginning writer, and I see this all the time with buddies of mine who've got Emmys and Oscars for other things, right? They might be like, they're just not a writer. They don't have writing credit. They don't have, maybe they're a cinematographer. Maybe they're a special effects person, but they've never written before. And they'll write a script, and it's fairly interesting, and they'll give it to me, and it tends to work out. But when I start reading the action, I start reading what they're good at, which is a bunch of premise turns, a bunch of mechanical turns in a scene that don't really reach out to the human condition. And the one thing I'm going to talk about in terms of action would be if you needed to write a fight scene for Rocky. It's Rocky Balboa. Every fight scene goes the same. He wins for a little while, loses almost to the, he actually loses one of the first fights that sets up his retaliation fight, right? But the big battle at the end is typically him, getting to the point where he just takes a deep breath, finds all this new energy, and then wails on the whoever the bad guy is on that particular movie, and he wins, right? Just by and then he's just fully exhausted, right? This formula was done 5 times because it's such a decent tension, release formula that the audiences just will watch it until no one writes it anymore, right? I think 5 times was the nail in the coffin for that particular franchise, right? But you see it all the time. Now, take a Rocky fight scene, especially if you've seen the film. And I wasn't a huge fan of this, but, you can substitute any other fight scene that you've seen in other scripts, right? Every single win and loss turns an emotional turn in that character. Everybody's nervous at the beginning of the final fight in any one of the Rockies. We don't know if Rocky's going to do it. Of course, we do, but we tend to go with a suspension of disbelief because we like a good story. They've always built up a formidable opponent who is very serious and very capable of kicking his ass, right? And so it's going to be a big mashup. So all this tension, this emotional tension, what's at stake? Maybe the guy's got to win the fight because he's going to get a $10,000, $10 million check, and that's going to pay some bills and save the church, right? Or whatever it is, right? So all of the tension is entering the ring. And so there's not just the premise of two guys going in to fight. Within the fight, every single blow to the face, to the body, means something. Because what's at stake is being beat up in that ring. So let's just say one of the Rockies, he's, this never happened, but let's just say he needed the money. He needed the $500,000 check that's going to happen if he wins, because he's not quite the super mega famous boxer at this particular time. And it's going to save lives. It's going to do all kinds of things. Every time he takes a punch, metaphorically in your mind, what's at stake takes a punch. But if you don't set that up, that punch is just a punch. You're just like, oh, well, he's probably going to win, right? You don't want that dry, empty, soulless mechanic in the ring. You want everything to matter to an individual. And I'm using this analogy, but I want you to map it directly onto every single piece of dialogue you've ever written in your life to make sure that what is being said is touching the heart. It's either making a character have more dimension, which makes you love them more. It's pissing you off, which makes you sort of turn that guy slowly into an antagonist, or maybe you empathetically feel sorry for the guy or girl because they're being done wrong. You have to make sure that nothing is exhibitioned dialogue, meaning it's just some words coming out, it fills up the page, but it doesn't touch anybody's heart. Now, McKee has a very complicated technique to discuss this, and I'm not sure it really attaches to people's minds, which is why I want to say it my way, which is he's talking about when you take Robert McKee's courses, and again, take his seminars, buy his book story, buy it on the audio, buy it on paper so you have the diagrams and stuff. Just obsess on this guy for a little while and you'll have a lot of mechanisms at your disposal. But his technique is to say that everything that is spoken reverses the charge of the scene. What the hell does that mean? Well, I'm going to repeat just a tiny smidgen from the screenplay thing because this is something that doesn't occur properly in your first runs typically, and this is what you're going to be achieving in your rewrite process. Someone says something positive. Someone says something negative. Then someone flips it positive. Then it flips it negative, flips it positive, flips it negative, to the point where at the end of the scene, it's either double positive or double negative. It's either been resolved completely or it has gone totally south. And usually at the beginning of the script, everything's going south and it needs to be repaired at the base of the script in the third act or fourth act, as I like to write, right? So when you go into your dialogue, and just so that you know, Hollywood has dialogue people. In my experience, they're pushed up as these incredibly talented folks, and every once in a while you'll actually get one assigned to your script. But in my experience, they're not that good. As a matter of fact, a lot of the rewriters in Hollywood, I think, are atrociously bad. The amount of people who have rewritten on scripts that ended up being absolute junk bombs, right? They bombed in the theaters. They bombed even in the people that liked perhaps the special effects or the score. They're like, yeah, but the story was so horrible, I don't even remember it. And you'll be surprised how many people work on a script. Like it was. I can't mention these films, otherwise I'll just blow up bridges between my friends. But there's some amazing films that have been created in the last, say, 5 years that I've seen, where I know that over 25 writers wrote on these scripts, and they're just absolute pieces of junk. It was as if no one understood what the hell they were doing. And that's why you have an opportunity to get in this business and make something happen. My teacher, Robert McKee, constantly reinforces that the movies that you see in Hollywood are the very best scripts that they are able to get their hands on, which is why he says television is the place to go if you want to see a good story. And again, the duality between television and film is that in a film you have maybe 2 hours to tell your story. If you're super lucky and you're Peter Jackson, you get 3.5 hours to tell your story. That's not that much time to really build up characters, make something feel threatened, and then resolve it at the end of the story. Now, I think you can do it. People did it in the past, left and right. In the 70s, what I tried to tell the kids today is I said, look, movies suck today. And they go, well, no, it's just a generational thing, right? No Country for Old Men. You're just an old fart. And I'm sitting there going, when's the last time any one of your friends grabbed your clothing and said, you come with me, we have to go see this film? When I was a kid, that happened 2 or 3 times a year, right? In 1982 is what I like to say is one of the best years of film history. You had E.T., Tron, someone claimed Dark Crystal was in there, but I'm not sure, and Blade Runner, all in one shot. And that's just a few of the scripts that came out in 82. There's amazing things that happened in 82. But all year long, everyone's like, you got to come to the movies, you got to come to the movies. I mean, it was just amazing what happened. And, in the 70s, 78, we had Close Encounters. 77, we had Star Wars, and we had Close Encounters. I mean, it just kept going and going and going. There's just these amazing films. And we don't have that kind of push anymore. The last time anyone grabbed me for a film was Avatar. It took me 3 weeks to see the film in Southern California because every single theater was full constantly. I couldn't buy a ticket to sit in the seat. I went twice with my family to the movie theater because they were out visiting, and we went to the theater and we had to go home because the theater was full. It was like 2 weeks after the movie released, and we're going to a mega theater, right? And we're willing to shop at the mall for 2 hours waiting for the next film, but they were just sold out constantly. That's a great film. Whether or not you like it or not, the guy put asses in seats, and that's why James Cameron can make 3 more Avatars and do anything he wants. When he says he's on top of the world, the brother is on top of the world, all right? And we want to be in his position. We want to have that mobility. But the reason why Cameron does so well is that he not only has the eye as being a director, but he understands story writing. And you'll find that the greatest films and the greatest directors understand story. They can write their own scripts. And there's a lot of famous directors right now that make crappy films every single time. But they have a way of taking a crappy script and making it look good with special effects. And so the audience, which is just wishing and hoping and praying that there'd be a good script and a good special effects and a good score, would all come into one. They're willing to give a little bit of money, which is the only place they can go, right? So we want to change that. But they have people that write dialogue that are going to go into your dialogue and rewrite it. And I'm going to tell you a little secret, all right? You can write dialogue loosely, and it sort of gets the job done in the scene. But if you hand that crap into the studio, and they like your idea, they like your premise, they like your story, they can see the greater perfection of what you were trying to go for, right? If you leave it loose, then everything that you wrote, every word that you wrote down will never occur on the silver screen. And so you're sitting with your loved one watching your film on the silver screen, and you're going to be like, I didn't write that. Well, that was my idea. And you're going to have all of your stuff replaced because you didn't take the time to do it right the first time. There are ways to write dialogue sequences that are so tight and so perfect and so profound that to change a single word would make the studio head who's requiring that someone actually take a second look at this thing, because it's sort of their responsibility, see if they can shake out something better out of what you've done. Once they read the before and after, they're going to go, yeah, that kind of sucks. The new one kind of sucks. Let's stick with the original sequence, because I laughed at the original version, or I cried at the original version, and this new version just sort of took it away. And I don't want to lose that emotional turn. Right. Now, the other one, let's just take a break for a quick second from all the heavy metadata, is that when you write a script, one of the big questions is how to tone all of your action, and especially the action, which is, if you formally learn how to write screenplays, what you're going to be told is, don't tell the director what to do in your film. Try not to tell them what lens to use, how to frame a particular shot, etc., etc. Now, I see this utterly marginalized constantly. I'm in a privileged position to have people that work on these big films. They're already locked. The screenplay's locked, and they're basically doing something to make the film happen, right? Production, design, or special effects, or something like that. And I'll be sitting in their office, and they're like, "Here's the script." After it releases, they let me take it home, and I read these things because I'm like, "Well, this one got made." So whatever was on paper here at least satisfied some group of people in Hollywood. Now, sometimes there's unqualified people in Hollywood that greenlit crap, and so you don't want to, again, like I always say, surround yourself with only the masters. Screw everything else. People are like, well, you need to see everything. And it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Surround yourself with the masters, and then guess what you'll understand being a master, right? The people who go and read everything, I just think they have too much time on their hands. They're really an observer. They're a critiquer, and they're not in the game at all. They're just observing. So for them, it's like, give me more. If you're going to be in the game of actually forging new realities through scripts, you're going to have to see the good stuff, right? But anyway, I look at these scripts, and they're telling the director what to do like crazy. My advice to you in this is the following. I was a huge fan of Shakespeare, and I remember my acting teacher once told me, he said, Shakespeare never wrote action. He just wrote prose. He just wrote the dialogue that everyone says, and he says that Shakespeare's amazing accomplishment was that the prose were so perfect. The dialogue was so on point of everything that was going on within a sequence or a scene or whatever, that you knew what was going on in the environment. You knew what was around the character because of what was being spoken. And so I struggle with that exact thing. I want to achieve that level of dialogue where it is absolutely evident what's going on in the room just due to what's spoken. And it's not like I'm Scooby-Dooing the dialogue. Well, look at that lever over there. If we pull that down, it's not like that. But I try to keep my action as minimal as possible. When it comes to telling a director what to do, I would say this as a general rule of thumb. To the degree you have ever been a director in your life, you can experiment going closer to more camera moves and that sort of thing to the director. But it's going to have to be very sparing. If you know the director and the director likes you and you're writing for that director, you can have, I think, some tea with the person, a beer, a little dinner, and kind of get approval to start throwing in stuff. You could say, well, I got this scene, I think it's with the wide angle lens and blah, blah, blah. What do you think? And that director's like, absolutely, dude, that sounds so great. I love the way you write. I love the way you think. And at that point, the director's looking for a duplicate of themselves, right? It's always why I say people hire other people. They want duplicates of themselves. If you have that rapport with the director, then to the degree that you guys always see eye to eye, you can put that kind of stuff in your action. I don't think you need to at all. I think that you are going to be essentially describing 3 different types of shots. A wide shot, which is always used to set the environmental scene. It's something where you need to see the vista. You need to see what's, if there's a car and a tree, you need to basically put that in the person's eye. And again, you want to do this as judiciously as possible with as few words as possible, right? And again, I know it sounds like I'm just telling you how to write a normal screenplay, but what I am trying to tell you is go back and look at everything that you've written to make sure it's as honed and as perfect as what I'm saying. Because I think that if you're a normal human being, I don't even care how, I've read so many spec scripts from directors that have Oscars, and it's their very first draft of it, and it's full of all the same mistakes that you and I would make. So don't think that there's some magic gene where someone just sits down and blows it out and then hands it into Hollywood. It never happens. I mean, it's probably happened a couple times, but it was just as logical as saying I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket and I'm definitely going to win. That doesn't happen either. You just don't make a decision to win. So we're going to have to keep this process. Again, the sculpting analogy is for where I want your mind to go. The wide shot's the widest one. A medium shot. Medium shot is what I like to say is every single friend of mine who decides to make a little short on the internet, and I'm not talking about one that was recently posted on our website, but my comedian friends that try to do these little skits, they do medium shots constantly, and they'll have this guy that, are you a cameraman? Of course, the guy goes, yeah, I can hold a camera. And so what the guy does is he stands up waist high. He stands up, holds the camera right here, and he's 5'8" to 6 foot, somewhere in that range. And every single scene is just a 5'8" to 6 foot medium shot down to the characters, and always down to the characters, right? They couldn't conceive of moving the camera. They've seen 100 films in their lifetime, and they never realized that there was different frames that a cinematographer actually pulls off. And so medium shots are the death blow, I think, of utter boredom, right? Now, you don't want to say wide shot on this, medium shot on that constantly in your script, but from time to time when you're setting up one of your scenes, right, you may want to actually explicitly say you were looking at the whole thing, and you might just say wide shot on da-da-da-da-da, and you can see da-da-da-da in the scene, right? Medium shots, well, that's sort of just the given tone of anything that you describe. It is the assumption angle of a camera, right? And again, if you're talking about something that's interesting in the camera at all, no matter if it's wide, medium, tight, the people reading know. The people reading can see what you're talking about. But if you do explicitly move the eye with a couple words here and there, they will start to feel like you understand the industry. They'll feel like you understand the visual context of everything that's going on inside your scene. And you take the burden off of them to having to make the camera choice inside their mind. So there's great benefit to a few loose words. And again, you're not trying to say, using the 60x zoom lens, blah, blah, blah. Forget all that crap. Don't try to give technical knowledge through your script. And some people might read a script and they'll see a bunch of that in the script. And it's like, you know what? You might be reading the director's script, especially if you bought one offline. You might be reading like, Ridley Scott's director's Final Cut script, where he has personally put in all those choices. You're not him. Don't do that, right? If it's written for you to direct, well, then obviously put it in there if you want to. But there's two different scripts that you usually do, and you produce it, you line produce it, and every single thing has all of its little requirements in there, and you're going to have your director lens requirements in there. So just try not to push that in there. But the last scene is a tight scene, a tight shot, right? And so if you think that someone is going to be, like to say you're Darth Vader, and there's a medium shot of him coming into the Corvette at the beginning of Star Wars 1, and they blast the doors, and the stormtroopers come filing in, and then as the smoke is rolling down the hallway, punching through the cloud of smoke, is one 8-foot Darth Vader, and he never touched that chest plate on his chest, right? He had all these buttons on his chest, and it just was always on autopilot, right? Which is like his breathing machine or something like that, right? Oddly, he couldn't solve that with the Force, but you never saw him touch it. But if he ever did touch it, and if he were to ever touch that chest plate for any reason, we would assume that would be a very, very important moment, right, to fiddle with his buttons. And you might actually tell the script, tight shot on Darth Vader's control plate, chest plate, he depresses red, red, blue. That's it. And then something has to happen. Something major has to happen as a result of taking that, or pushing that item, or taking an object. If it's a clue, then maybe someone lift something out of a room, steal something out of the room, and you just want to say that happens. Now, a lot of times, I have a scene in one of my films that a guy steals something, and the way I did it was, instead of writing some elaborate scene where he's fiddling with something and trying to take something out of an object and steal it, I have a part in the script where I call it out. I say that object's there, and I describe it, and it's a logical object in the room, but it's also attached to the plot. It's something that would be nice if he actually had it on his person for future scenes, because he's going to need reference material, and that particular object has some reference material in it. Could be like a book like an Indiana Jones book. When he had his father's book in the third movie, he carried this book with him, and it had all the clues that his father had collected over the years, right? Well, let's just say that book is lifted and not given to him by his father. So he visits his father. We push the camera, tight shot on a relic book, with the title on it, ... which tells the audience exactly what's in that book. Maybe it's a Necronomicon or something, for God's sakes. You're in Giger's basement, right? You do some other things in the scene, and you come back, and it's missing. Tight shot on the table, the book is missing. You can only assume that the guy that owns the book didn't move it. He didn't take it from himself, so the only person that could have lifted that book out of the scene, to the mind's eye of reading the script, would be the new person, who's going to be using that information to unravel something in the script moving forward. So without saying Indiana Jones stole the book from his father, this never happened in the film, you would know as the reader that Indiana Jones took the book from his father. And that's one way you can actually infer into the mind something that happens without actually saying it explicitly happened. The more you have to do on-point action and on-point dialogue, as I talked about in the first film, so I'm going to review here because it's a big part of rewriting. It's really where it happens, unless you're just an amazing first-time writer, right? That's the way you do it. You want to. Actually, my point was to say, if you put a bunch of on-point stuff, you start looking like a rookie, and you just don't want that, right? You want to have someone realize, my God, when someone has an experience that's the following: they read your script and they get it, they totally get it, and they're excited. Whether it be your friend, your family member, or a studio head, or a reader for the studio. And they just can't wait to be responsible for greenlighting this thing with their tiny approval to get it to the next person, to get the bigger approval. But when someone says, well, describe the film to me, and the reader goes, it's kind of about this, this, and this, but it's so amazing, you just have to read it. I can't really describe it to you, because as I try to describe it to you, I'm just insulting the script. This happens all the time, right? That's the kind of reaction you want with your script. It's just so damn good and so easy to digest. And there's a word called accessible. It means it's very easy to access in the mind. It's very easy to lift the words onto your brain and paint the whole movie in your mind, right? Again, I think the first secret of rewriting is that this process is iterative, constantly iterative. And you'll hear this in class, you'll hear this in books, but again, the exact thing that's occurring is not described properly, right? They're all trying to say, I'm just going to teach you how to do it right first, and if you want to learn how to rewrite, just simply read my book over again and take any lesson you've heard out of the book and just apply it to whatever you've written, and eventually it'll all just shake out. It's like, nah, you can do that, but what it'll end up being is you'll feel defeated, is sort of how a rewrite that goes bad will feel. But if you know exactly what you need to do, as a rewrite regiment, then it becomes more like, okay, well, what I need to do is read this action now. I'm telling you right now, the thing that you need to know how to do and just do is read your stuff out loud. You need to find a place where you don't feel weird reading in front of your family or whatever. I don't care if you got to sit in your car at the beach or at some hillside and read it to yourself. I would say get out, get a hard copy, or get your iPad. Hard copy is usually better because you're going to want to write notes. You'll hear words trip off the tongue. They don't go smoothly, as Shakespeare said, right? Trippingly off the tongue, right? You want to make sure everything reads beautifully. So a lot of times what will end up occurring is that certain consonants, and this is just going to split some hairs with you, but this is how minute and how intense the process really is in Hollywood, okay? If you have a bunch of consonants in words, like my name, there's a K and an L, Mark Lowe, right? K and L just don't go well together. My middle name is Sean, so like Mark Sean Lowe, it softens. The K to the L is softened by an S. There's an interesting thing with that. So when you're reading your script, you need to make sure that every word beautifully butts up against the next word. And the only way you're going to really find this out is if you speak it, right? And you can have your computer speak to you. If you have a Macintosh computer, they have a beautiful dictation mechanism. You always need to turn up the speed a quarter of a single measurement because it's always too slow. But you can have your computer read it to you as well. Most screenwriting software has sort of readback technology. Again, you'll need to speed up the voice most likely. But reading out loud yourself will be the greatest thing you've ever done. You get your pen, you get your paper, and you're going to strike out words. And you just think up, synonyms to words and smooth it all out. The other one is make sure that the words aren't too big. Make sure the words aren't too technical. Make sure a word, if you can, is emotional, right? My writing teacher once said, he goes, words like utilize. He goes, only assholes use words like utilize. Now, he's not talking about technical documentation. He's talking about a script. He's just saying that word does not belong in any script. Maybe not even in the dialogue, Well, we're utilizing them. Well, if you need a guy to sound super dry and super scientific and really sort of go in the background of important guys talking, use the word utilize, and the reader will just go, ugh, get that guy away from me. It's funny because if you're ever a fan of rap music, and you find this in metal and you find this in all different genres of music, but I'll tell you in rap music, because it's a game of using words, right? You'll hear that if you listen to old school rap from the 80s, the raps were simple, they were beautiful, and they were smooth. LL Cool J, for one thing, he just has the smoothest freaking dialogue. No word was ever added that didn't need to be added to a song. You go into the 90s where they doubled and tripled the amount of words, and they sped up the way that they rap. It's like Eminem. The reason why you can't just hum an Eminem song half the time is because that brother is like a wordsmith on a super master scale. And it only works when that dude says the lines through the microphone, because he has the art to not only write super complex phrases, but he knows how to move his mouth super duper fast to make them come out and sound right. The minute you try to do it, it's like, blah, blah, it's all messed up. Same thing's going to happen with your script. No one's Eminem reading your script. They are normal Jim and Joe, Jane, whatever, reading your script. And so you need to make sure that you make it as accessible as possible by picking words carefully, right? Now, what'll happen with settings is you're missing things. Like I said, you're going to miss things, and you're going to immediately start talking about things that are missing out of the setting. If you mean to surprise the audience with something that wasn't mentioned in the setting, then you don't want to mention it in the setting, so that when it is debuted, it's a surprising object that's injected into the script. At that point, hopefully your prose reflect some surprise with the characters. Where the hell did you get the blender off your horse in 1850? This hasn't been invented yet, right? And then you're dealing with the Seth MacFarlane film that's funny, right? So that's your intent, right? Now, the other one is to punchline your scenes. And when you hear the word punchline, you're going to see in your brain a comedy right away. Now, if you're writing a comedy, and I write comedies too, I love an ending line that's funny. And I'm just going to tell you right away that being funny in any genre is actually a good idea. Every once in a while, you need a good punchy laugh because people they need it. They need it in the audience, especially if you're doing a really intense drama. You're putting a lot of pressure on the audience. I've been told by folks that work with Milton Berle, I guess he had a saying, he says, you can never fail with comedy. You can never fail with a laugh, you know? And again, you might change the genre of your film if you end up writing a really serious drama and it's all of a sudden super funny, and then you're like, well, shit, maybe I wrote a comedy drama, you know, and go with it, man. If you've got that skill to make people laugh, that's where you should go, because not everybody can do that, and especially reading it off paper. You know, when you go to the Improv here in LA or wherever you go to a comedy club and people are delivering lines beautifully, again, like an Eminem, a comedian's got the skill of inflection, of story building. They know how to punch it a couple times, and they know to loop concepts back from the first hour of their bit to the end to tie it all together before they walk off stage. They are doing something masterfully that you can't deliver through a script unless you can never deliver the tone. So the words are going to always have to meld the mind to be that unquestionable performance, that unquestionable feeling that you want the reader to have. And so my thing is to say that you have two punchlines at the end of every scene that you need to make sure is there. One, the very last word spoken in a scene is going to have to button up the purpose of the scene. Now, you'll hear it many, many times in screenwriting classes that, you know, if a scene doesn't have an emotional charge, an emotional turn, especially the positive-negative flipping that McKee talks about. McKee basically says if your dialogue doesn't flip polarity from positive to negative all the way down, then whatever line is not flipping needs to be either rewritten to flip or it needs to be erased. And if your sequence just is a barreling single parody, it's all positive or it's all negative, there needs to be a huge reason why that scene's still in your script. Because at that point, Hollywood says, this scene is fully exhibitionism. It's just there to talk to yourself. You're just wasting my time. It didn't move anything forward. I don't even care that this scene happened. If that ever starts occurring, and when you're reading to someone, you need to see how they react to everything that's spoken. But your punchline, okay, will automatically govern and help you regulate the purpose of your scene. If you can't punchline a scene to have a reason for being in the film, then you probably have a scene that just needs to be erased or rewritten. Okay? So in a comedy, you want to have last line probably pull out a piece of humor. You know, and I love like rhetorical jokes, you know. The other one is maybe the last thing that happens is a moment of action. Someone looks at someone and it's just an awkward looking moment. Someone gets caught doing something they weren't supposed to do, or they say, you know, I'm not doing that. And they're like, yes, you are. No, I'm not. Why would you say I'm doing that? Because you this, and this. And they're like, you are totally seeing things. You're reading more into it than you need to do, right? And they're like, I don't know. I think you're lying. And they're like, I'm so hurt that you're saying this. And then something falls on something and reveals that they were actually doing what they said that they weren't doing. You know, that would be like a punchline at the end of that scene. So use some sort of closing mechanism at the end of your scenes to make sure it actually has value in the scene. And you'll actually find that people forgive you for sort of a crappy buildup as long as there's a good punch at the end of the scene. Again, you don't want that. You don't want anything to be sort of remotely, well, you know, they'll rewrite it at the studio. That's like the worst thing you could ever say, right? Let me give you a couple technical things. Let's take a break and just go to some technical things. I want to talk about phone calls in films, and I want to talk about action fight scenes in films, just for a split second. So this happened to me recently where I had several scripts that I've written, and I was working with my mentor, and I said, when you start screenwriting software, you have internal, int dot, and then you describe where they are, and then you say external dot where they are, right? Well, you run into a telephone conversation where someone's in a phone booth in the 70s, and they're talking to someone at home. And you know that very well that they've got to flip the camera back and forth between the two people. You don't have to do it that way, but it'll happen. And you'll end up running internal, this person's phone booth, something said. Internal, home, something said. And you just litter your script with all this white space, right? It's almost like you're cheating with your page count by going back and forth, back and forth. So I asked a question. I said, well, what do you do, right? My buddy's written at least 20 plus scripts and sold every single one of them. And I was like, what do you do? And he goes, you know what? He goes, I'll flip the camera one time so that I can get the setting described at the phone booth and the setting described in the home, and then I just have the conversation. Just flip back and forth between the conversation. And if I need to, if something is happening where someone is actually fiddling with something on their end, and it's part of the script, right? It could be that someone says, did you take my credit card? And the guy's stolen the credit card. And we need to actually say that. You could say, John rolls a credit card in his fingers as he replies, no, I didn't take your credit card, right? So if something needs to be called out action-wise, then go ahead and insert that as a piece of action. But from what I'm told, and I've stopped doing it now, is you don't actually necessarily need to go internal, external, all the way down. They'll get it, right? The other one is the following. Let's say you have a fight scene, and we're not talking about a Rocky fight scene. A Rocky fight scene is an epic moment in the movement of the script, is an epic moment that it needs to be called out in every single punch, every single thing that needs to occur, and it needs to attach to, Rocky's wife off on the side, reacting to it, and saying something to the fact that, hang in there, baby, or something like that. But you would need to know you got hit in the face for her line to make any sense, right? So in those particular epic moments, you need to call it out. But if you were to have sort of a fight scene, it depends on how established your character is in the fight scene. Now, let's say that Wolverine walks into a bar. There's many scenes with him doing this, right? Especially his solo film. If you are on the hook for a Marvel Odyssey in a fight scene where there's claws are going to come out of a guy's hands and he's going to get shot and he's going to heal, all these sorts of things, you have an extra set of requirements to make sure that those are called out at a judicious rate such that, he doesn't his claws don't come out 10 times in the fight, doesn't get shot every single round of punching. It's got to be very focused. They came out once, he used them, he got shot at the end and he healed, those kind of things. But there are fight scenes where it doesn't really matter exactly how everything happens. Hollywood's going to see the fight scene as, well, we just need to have a fight, coordinator get in there and figure out what's the sexiest punches and stuff like that, right? I guarantee you, I haven't read any of the latest Star Wars, the first three that Lucas did, but a lot of those saber fighting scenes, I'm sure on paper, was something as simple as saying, Sith warrior fights early Obi-Wan, right? And it ends with Obi cutting the Sith guy in half. That's probably all that needs to be spoken in the script. Then again, you have this sort of the amount of time that it sets up the scene. Now, if you need tension to rise, then you're going to have to make that tension rise in your scene. But if it's one of these things where, and I probably picked a bad example, but they're mowing through a bunch of guys as they go through a particular location, trying to get to the ultra bad guy, which would probably be the Sith guys. So we might write out the Sith fight where we have to talk about this lightsaber that comes out both sides, right, like a staff. And then we would say, well, this one thing is important for you to know, so I'm going to call that out. The Obi-Wan seems to force the Sith guy back 10 feet, and then he puts a death blow right on his forehead, but the last second the guy blocks it. You might actually want to call out certain things like that. But just know that there's uber professionals that know this stuff, at least basic fight scenes, maybe not a laser fight scene or a saber fight scene, lightsaber scene. They definitely know punching, kicking, martial arts, mixed martial arts better than you do. And what's nice about that is that the studios are going to be leaning towards those people anyway. So you don't actually have to call out certain, ancillary fight scenes, especially if a guy's pushing through a crowd to get to the main person. So it's okay to say in your action, whatever the main character is, Joe, is confronted by 4 or 5 gang members and easily punches through. Boom. You just basically told the audience that's reading this thing that there was a bunch of people that attempted to stop our main character, and he was able to mow through them. Then when you get to the big boss battle, you start going into all the details. So it's just a couple technical things I just wanted to throw at you. Another technical thing I wanted to say is that a lot of screenwriting software sort of overachieves with their feature set. And when you start a new script, especially in Final Draft, they turn on a bunch of this continuation dialogue stuff so that if you ever, your main character saying something, a little bit of action needs to occur, and that same character continues talking, they'll put in parentheses over to the side, continue, CONT dot. You could turn all this crap off, and I'm telling you right now, Hollywood doesn't want to see that. They don't want to see pages consumed by stuff that's like painfully obvious. Of course, I know that the guy's continuing to talk. You don't need to put an abbreviation off to the side that something's being said, again, by the same character. Now, there are some abbreviations that are real important. And one of the biggest ones is what is spoken off camera. And I think I mentioned this in my first episode, but I want to mention this again as you're rewriting to make sure that if you have any off-camera dialogue, and what that means is someone's speaking way over here and they're just not on camera. Like, it's like you see them once, 2 people at home, they're on different sides of the same floor, and that one's getting ready in the bathroom, one's getting ready in the bedroom, and it flips the camera back and forth a little bit, but one line sneaks in from off camera. Honey, did you get the so-and-so? And the guy's waiting, or the girl's waiting, and then the spouse goes, no. The trouble with off-camera dialogue is the following. Human beings rely on reading lips more than you could possibly imagine, especially as it gets over 40 and people's hearing starts to be impaired naturally. They need the lips. And it just depends on how the actor's voice reads, meaning is noticed and interprets in the brain as to whether or not it's a good off-camera voice. There are certain voices that are beautiful off-camera, and there are certain voices that are fairly mumbly. If, for instance, you're doing a period piece, let's just say, you want to write the greatest British story about someone, and they have a heavy accent. You're putting it in Liverpool, or you have a big Cockney accent running around, or maybe like our friend Jared always says, the Scottish accent for Americans is a little hard to understand. Now, if you're going to put a guy or girl like that in the script, but you wanted to market it to an American audience, off-camera dialogue is going to have to be down to the most primitive statements that cannot be misunderstood by the dialect and the accent of those individuals. You're going to have to keep most things on camera. That sounds uber technical, but I tell you what, it's where the film will bomb. And again, the director can make a choice. This is not going to be off camera. You said it was off camera, but I'm not going to make it off camera. But I just want to say, if you want to create perfection, and this is what you have to do for Hollywood, this is what the rewriting process is all about. And let me give you a quick analogy of being either an actor, writer, or any other person in Hollywood. But acting and writing is where the two open audition, it's what I call the open audition. I got air quotes for those listening to it online. Hollywood sees and is entertained by the very best talent on planet Earth 24/7, 365. Every single second of the year, they see the best talent. Now, they also see some super crappy talent, but it's usually referred by someone. But an open audition has some mathematics to it. If you know someone, well, then you know someone. You've got some inroads, and you can bypass all the people that would stop you out of jealousy or out of just incompetency. But if you know someone, then you've got a special thing going. But if you're like most of us, you'll start off with no references at all. And the reason why I'm mentioning the following is because that perfectionism I talk about in the creative episode. You have to be, regardless if you've ever been, you have to turn into your finest critic. You have to be absolutely brutal on yourself. And to the degree you have anyone in the industry that can read your stuff, again, you don't want to take them early drafts. I would say, I typically don't give away drafts unless I'm involved with a business partner that's like, I've hired you to do the script, which has happened to me a couple times. I don't give away any early drafts because first impressions are first impressions. Definitely don't let the actor read anything, no matter what. You need to be almost in your 8th draft before you give it away to the actor to read. And I've made that mistake as well. But the reason why I want to emphasize all this stuff is that it matters. It really, really matters. And when you have the open audition, you have a situation where you're up against all the junk. It's like the American Idol thing where they used to have a bunch of, stadiums full of 60,000 people. Well, just watching the show that you're talking about out of 60,000 people, I think it's safe to say that maybe 200 out of 60,000, just divide 200 by 60,000, that's your percent, move the decimal over to, of how many people are actually remotely qualified to be in that arena to talk or to sing and to communicate with the judges and to have the talent to be on the show. Well, that's us when we go in with our scripts. And the only kids that get on that show and the only scripts that ever get moved in are the ones that have the first 3 pages especially just masterfully written, right? I talked about how to write a treatment in the first version of this, and that is something that is absolutely paramount, pardon the pun. Hollywood doesn't read scripts like you think they do. If you have someone reading your script, that means that you've gone through a bunch of stages with your treatments to convince them to read your script. Your pitch has got to be about 3 lines. And I'll tell you a great place to see beautifully written pitch lines. Go to Netflix, tune in, go to the Twilight Zone section. Now, there was 5 seasons to Twilight Zone. The 4th season was all 1-hour episodes, and for some reason the family's holding all those back. I don't know why. They're brilliant. But start with season 1 and get the screen up where you actually have all the episodes on your right and the description on your left. Okay? Just use your little cursor, and Apple TV is like my favorite one to do this by, but just tab down the scenes, or tab down the shows, and they have a 1 to 2 sentence description. I don't think any of them have 3, but if they do, you're lucky. Scroll down each one of them and read the line. And to the degree you've seen the Twilight Zones, the beautiful thing is you're going to be like, oh my God, that Twilight Zone is so complex, but that one sentence over there beautifully describes what's going on. It describes the emotional arc in this episode. It is the controlling idea of the episode. We always talk about the controlling idea from the first show, right? It is the one thing that thrusts you through the scene. I'm going to get on that in just a second here with the rewrite. But please do me a favor, go through all 5 seasons of that. If you haven't seen them all, watch them all, because if you are ever in this is what I find for myself, an X-1 episodes, if you can go get those, I found them off archive.org for free. The MP3s, but it's a radio show made in the mid-50s. It is like Twilight Zones, incredible sound effects. It's what a lot of the material was actually pulled from, I think. But watch them all, because you'll be infused with ideas and turns and what is capable of being told. That's what's beautiful about the Twilight Zone, is that it opens your mind to say, oh my gosh, I thought I had these constraints on me, but I don't. I can actually take the script and turn it and make a cool twist or a cool moment where something gets impacted. The nice thing about a Twilight Zone is that every single scene, every single beat in every scene and sequence turns the emotional heart of a character in front of your face. It is utterly phenomenal. From a couple waking up in a dollhouse and they don't know it. They wake up and they're like, oh my gosh, I gotta brush my teeth. Where's my toothbrush? And they don't know. And they find out that the mirror's fake on the wall. That they lean on a tree and it falls over and there's this crosshatch prop on the bottom. They're like, just everything that happens is amazing. Go see that stuff. Now, we have the controlling idea. This is part of from the first series, but we have the controlling idea and the subplots. The controlling idea is why you're writing this film in the first place, and subplots are nice, marrying sort of extra plots that are going on with extra characters in there. You need to understand whether or not your scene, your beat, your sequence, whatever, scene, sequence, beat, is applied to your controlling idea or your subplot. You have to understand what's being said. And you can weave them like this. The more you become a masterful writer, you can put them together, right? One kicks off the other one. There should be, obviously in your first act, something that's completely building up what your controlling idea is in the mind of the viewer. You're going to tell stories with pictures, and you're going to tell stories with words. That's the only thing you have. You do not get to tell anybody what someone's thinking, unless somehow you want to cheesily put that in the dialogue. Someone goes, well, what are you thinking? What are you thinking right now? You know, that's be a pretty heartfelt moment because it's a pretty cliche thing to say. Whatever comes out of their mouth is going to have to be profound, metaphoric, and off point. You know, not directly what they're thinking. It's going to have to be some, well, I thought life was going to be easier. You know, some weird thing like that. As you refine everything that's going on, and it's mostly in the dialogue, but because your action, your setting supports your action, and your action supports the dialogue in that order, right? You need to make sure that whatever's being spoken at any one point in time is the controlling idea of your film. It is what you're most responsible for accomplishing. So that's the way you vet whether or not what you've written should be in the film or not be in the film. If you have a subplot that you want to introduce into your script, I've never heard this spoken, not in any of the books, not in any of my lectures, but your subplot needs to be kicked off very specifically. Now, it's implied that that's what you would do, but I find the amount of things I've read or seen where it was like something starts occurring in a film and they're like, what's that over there? And they're like, oh, that's the subplot. And it's like, oh, so you're just sort of, you know, throwing paint on the wall and hopefully I see the Mona Lisa, and that's your subplot. I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't have to be an explosion that sets off the subplot, but there should be some turn. And it could be a non-speaking moment. It could be that book being lifted, like I said. That could kick off a subplot, you know. It could be that Indiana Jones picks up a Playboy instead of his father's archaeology book. And you're like, oh, yes, he's got something going on. Maybe it's a Playgirl. Maybe it's even weirder, right? That's some weird subplot that's starting to introduce itself. But it's something that gets that subplot going. And then the big, big thing that you see all the time, even as a rookie movie viewer, you'll see this all the time. And you will have said this to someone. You'll say, wasn't it weird how that never wrapped up? They started this whole thing and they didn't wrap it up. Now, a lot of times what happens is whatever was written down sucks so bad that they just cut it from the movie. So they did wrap it up, but they didn't really introduce it or move along. There was one in the movie Thor. Actually has a couple interesting things about it. There was a point in the original Thor where Thor grabs his girlfriend towards the end, and they're about to fly up to his world with that pattern on the ground. And they look at each other, and they say something to each other. And I forgot what the hell it was, but it was almost like some little lovey catchphrase. As if we had ever seen them do that in the past. Like they had done it somewhere in the past, and they were doing it again because this is what they do. And if they had done anything in that film to set up that scene, I entirely missed it, and I've seen it twice, right? So something weird got cut. But I happen to know the people who work with Chris, and I know that the Loki character, from what I understand, he's a renowned actor. He had a gigantic portion of his performance completely deleted from the film because they said he performed it perfectly, but the dialogue that was written for him was so atrocious in that script that they cut it on the cutting room floor, and it never made it into the film. So that'll happen as well. So it's not that doesn't happen. So I just want to let you know, it's not that everyone's a fool who makes a film and doesn't wrap up things or set up things properly. Sometimes it happens in the cutting room floor. But your responsibility is to get it right on paper. So your subplots, they need to be extremely interesting. As Sid Fields talks about in his books, I think he's nailed something that I think most of the writing teachers simply don't plagiarize because they know it's his technique and it's brilliant, which is what he calls the pinch points. if you know films, you got 30 minutes to set the thing up, typically. And it used to be really regimented in the 70s and 80s, and of course we poo-poo it now, but that's when we made all the greatest films in the world. But at 30 minutes is where your page literally needs to turn the movie on. It's like the power goes on. Your brain goes, oh my God, I totally get it. Premise and story have finally made it into each other. Stargate, they turn the Stargate on, they walk through this membrane, and now they're in this other world. All right, so that's at page 30. What they used to teach in a 3-act play is that at 60 pages is where you have your big midpoint of Act 2. So a huge turn happens in the controlling idea to juice everything up and put everything at stake that'll make the audience sit on the edge of their seat. By the end of Act 2 in the old format, it's 90 pages in, and at that point you have to you have to basically make sure your character has the boon, all the technique in order to solve the problem. In Empire Strikes Back, it was, Luke going to visit Yoda, learning on Dagobah how to be a Jedi warrior. Meanwhile, Cloud City's going to hell, and he looks into the future just before the end of Act 2 because Yoda teaches him how to do it, and he sees everybody suffering in Cloud City. And he says, oh, I've got to go save them. And Yoda's like, dude, That's a possibility of the future that you're seeing, not the future. And he goes, exactly, that's why I got to go save them. And he says, well, your training's not done. He's like, well, I'll come back and finish it, but I think I have enough to defeat my old man. Of course, he gets his hand cut off, right? He doesn't know it's his old man, but then he goes for the 3rd act, and they do the big battle in Cloud City. So he got what he needed. He did make it work pretty good. He did get his hand chopped off, found out his old man was Darth Vader, etc., etc. Now, the subplots, all right, the subplots are what we call, again, I'm going to plagiarize Sid Fields. And again, if you haven't read at least his first book on screenwriting, it costs nothing. I mean, that book must cost $15 with taxes, right? American. So between 30 and 90, and you got that 60-minute midpoint. Again, for me, it's now Act 2 and Act 3. In the center, I'm just going to go out from my perspective. So 4 acts, all 30 minutes apiece. The 2 center acts are the center part of the film. In the center of Act 2 and Act 3, 45 pages and I guess 65 pages. Is that right? No, 75 pages in, excuse me. You have these sort of areas in the script where the reader's now fatigued from reading what you have. And again, when you listen to me talk, if I don't vary my voice, it starts getting drony and you start falling asleep. It's just a natural thing. I take no offense, right? Same thing happens when they're reading a script. Even if I gave you, any one of you are a huge Star Wars fan, and I gave you the script for Star Wars, what is it, 9? Right? No, 8. 8? Yeah. No, 7. Jesus, 7, the one they're making, right? Let's say I even gave you 8. I say, here's the next one, right? And you are pissing yourself. I say, dude, you are the only guy or girl on planet Earth that are getting to see this script. And I say, I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to drink tea over here and cruise the internet on my telephone while you read that script because I can't leave it out of my eyesight. You can't take pictures of it with your telephone. You have to watch it in an armed guard, and I'm the guard. Even though it's Star Wars. And even though it might be the best frickin' Star Wars you've ever read in your life, you've ever will see in your life, you're going to get tired reading it. It's just what happens. And the amount of scripts I've given away to friends who are like so gung-ho about reading a script and they never finish it, man, they never even make it to the end of Act 1. It's because they're not used to reading scripts versus books. A lot of people love books because the book always gives them the metadata of what people are thinking and that kind of thing. And it's no slight on them. It's just a habit, right? Reading screenplays is totally different than reading books. And don't kid yourself with your family members that say they can do it, because most of them can't. But what they can do is have you in the living room. Everyone's well-fed. Everyone's taking a piss. Everyone's calm and cool. And you go, look, today we're going to do it like the 1800s. I'm going to stand in front of you and act out my story. And if you can't do that, I'm telling you right now, you're in the wrong business. If you don't enjoy reading your own writing, then you're not that good yet. Stick with it, right? But get it to the point where acting out your own stuff makes you feel great. Now, I warn you, when you start acting out your own stuff, this is when you find out whether or not you've got the goods. And again, if you read it by yourself, and you don't have a good imagination. I was an only child, so, having an imaginary friend, I don't think I really ever had an imaginary friend, quite frankly. But I definitely had, probably my teddy bear and that kind of stuff. Haven't seen him in years. If you can't imagine someone in the room with you, then reading it out loud isn't going to have the same effect as if someone is in the room with you. But if you're good at that, if you're good at imagining someone, and what I like to do, it's going to sound nuts, is just as a matter of accountability, I like to imagine that the people that I worship in writing are in front of me. And typically it's like a Rod Serling. If I had the privilege, he died in 75, I believe, 50 of cigarettes. If I had the privilege of having that guy in the room with me, can you imagine how prepared you'd want to be if you like that guy? And pick your favorite writer. But Rod wrote 90 episodes of 80 or 190 episodes, I think, of Twilight Zone. I can't remember exactly what the number is, but I think he wrote at least half of them. His are some of the best, right? They're just, once you see his credit roll in the front of the Twilight Zone, you know that one's one of the classic ones that everybody wants to see. And Charles Beaumont and even Philip K. Dick wrote a few. I think Ray Bradbury wrote one. So there's all kinds of beautiful things. X-1 is actually full of a lot of those writers as well. I don't think Rod ever wrote an X-1, but he certainly learned from it, I'll tell you that much. But if you can jack up the accountability of a reading exercise, what that's going to do is galvanize you to be prepared because you don't want to read crap. Now, my little trick to you as a reading exercise to your family or friends, spouses, whatever, is that if you're reading something and you immediately realize that what you wrote was crap, and there's two ways to do this, but have your pen ready and mark it up. But read to them what should be on the piece of paper. And just, if nothing else, just put a star by the paragraph so you don't slow yourself down. If you want to get really cool at it, I mentioned, I think in the first episode about writing screenplays, get yourself a dictaphone. I have an Olympus dictaphone. It's I think it has 55,000 hours on a battery charge, and it can go forever. Again, it took me 3 or 4 years before I filled this thing up. Most cell phones have some sort of audio memo thing. If you're good with your phone, you don't want to buy a dictaphone. Dictaphones are about $100 if you want to buy a good one, maybe and plus a few more dollars and change. But man, are they awesome! And they're legal to hold in your car. In Hollywood, when you drive around in LA, they can give you a ticket for your cell phone. But you could sit like this with a dictaphone, which you don't really need to do because the mics are so powerful. But if you put that down as you're reading to your family or friends, and you have the temerity and the patience to go back and listen to that and watch your script be read, as soon as you say something that's not in the script, and you keep track of that, you will make a refinement in your script that Hollywood gets to see. And again, if this starts to sound very painful to you, just understand that the regimen of this, the pain of this will wear off, and you'll actually become an amazing screenwriter in the end. But this is the reason why this isn't a fly-by-night sort of profession. And I don't care if you read some stupid story about, so-and-so just bought a screenwriting software and went nonstop for 3 days and wrote, some Gone with the Wind script. It doesn't work like that. It used to be that our education was so efficient that it wasn't as hard to talk in metaphors, off-point dialogue, to describe things. People had read hundreds of books before they ever touched screenwriting concepts, right? Just remember, back in the day, they had to write them on typewriters. I can't even imagine doing that today, right? Especially if you had to repaginate your script because you added a scene. I mean, you'd be typing and typing and typing forever just to type what you've already written. And maybe in just that process alone, you would write better. Today, we have beautiful choices out there. I use Final Draft. I used to use Screenwriter 2000. They're all the same. Honestly, if you're complaining about your screenwriting software, it's probably more you than the software, unless it crashes. So I think I'm going to stop there because this is getting kind of long. I've been doing some pretty long episodes. But hopefully this was engaging. Hopefully this was helpful to you. Again, if you haven't seen the first episode, you have to see that one first to make this one make a lot of sense. But again, I'm making this because I can't find any really good information out there. Again, I've been trying to convince my teacher, Robert McKee, to do a rewrite book, but he's a busy man. So I hope this was very helpful for you. Again, if you have any other questions, please put them in the comments down below or just message me somehow. Again, this is coming through the mkultraradio.com channel, which I know is kind of strange. We've experimented with creating other channels, but honestly, a channel has to have a critical mass of videos before it really feels like a channel, and I don't have time to start a brand new channel and create unique content over there and keep the content coming here. So just understand that MK Ultra Radio is a place to find cool stuff, diverse stuff, deep thoughts. If you don't like it, it's cool. Just move on to the next one. If you do like it, subscribe and like the video. And definitely subscribe to our podcast, because these are also released on podcasts. We tend to do the YouTube version first, because now we're editing everything in YouTube first, pushing it to the YouTube, and then I have to drag it out into MP3. I rebalance the audio. I do apologize that some of the videos actually have varying levels of audio quality. It's sort of tough in Final Cut to just say, look, make sure this is the minimum volume that comes out. So talking for hours, you'll hear my voice be a little louder at the beginning, a little softer towards the end. And you can create a curve inside the audio format in Final Cut, but it's just, I don't have time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. I gotta go get me a cold pop. So anyway, thanks for listening. Take care of yourself and somebody else. Please pass this information along if you think it'll be useful. I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Over now.